Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's public listening session hosted by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. I'm Cicely Waters with FMCSA, and again, thank you for joining us. Today's public listening session will focus on safety fitness determination. Today, you'll hear from Tom Liberatore, the Director of the FMCSA Office of Enforcement and Compliance, Dave Yessen, Chief Compliance Division, and Stacy Ropp, Transportation Specialist within the agency. We thank you all for joining as this is a true listening session. So there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions and share comments with our panelists today. We do want to make sure that we have as much time as possible for that discussion and to answer any questions that you may have. So without further delay, I'll now turn it over to Tom Liberatore.
Thank you, Cicely. Hello, good morning, or good afternoon, everyone, depending upon where you are. We're very pleased you could come join us today as we host this listening session on our safety fitness determination process. You can go ahead to the next slide, please. So the next slide, so just go over the list of panelists for today, and basically just a brief overview of the agenda. So what we're going to do today is just very quickly, I'm going to go over just a high-level overview of the safety fitness determination, and also just some background on the ANPRM, or the Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, that was published last year. And then we're going to go right into, as Cicely indicated, the discussion on SFD, and then we'll open it up the microphone, so to speak, to allow comments and input from our participants today. Go to the next slide, please. So real quick, just to give everyone, I'm sure most of the people on the line today are aware of what FMCSA's Safety Fitness Determination Process, or SFD, is and how it's utilized. But just in case you are not, what is Safety Fitness Determination, or SFD rating, which is part of our CSA program? It's a rating that's assigned to determine the ability of a motor carrier to continue to operate in interstate commerce. Right now, there is a three-tier system, which Stacy, who was introduced earlier, will be getting into as we kind of do some of the overview of the questions that were asked in the ANPRM. The process itself, the regulation surrounding the process, has been in effect since 1991. It has been modified several times over the years. So obviously the process that's in place now is not the same one that was in place in 1991. But just to summarize what the current SFD process is, it is based on an existing motor carrier data, information such as out-of-service rate, crash involvement, and other data that's collected during compliance review. You'll see the term compliance review and investigation used interchangeably several times. They're essentially the same thing. So if we say investigation or compliance review, they're an allegory for the same type of process. As I said, it's a three-tier or a three-option outcome that you have right now. Following the investigation or compliance review, you'll have one of three ratings coming out of that, either satisfactory, unsatisfactory, or conditional. Motor carriers may also remain unrated. Obviously, we don't have the ability to do compliance reviews or investigations of every motor carrier that's registered with the FMCSA. So those that have not been the subject of an investigation or a compliance review will remain unrated. And there's also some other reasons why you may remain unrated, but that is also an option. That's more really than I can get into today in order in the essence of time. If you are interested understanding the full methodology, please see the reference we have right there, which is in Part 385, 49 CFR, Part 385. Next slide, please. So real quick, we're just going to go over what was released last year. You will see the link to the docket below at some point after we're concluded with today's discussion. If you wish to go and review that, please feel free to go ahead. It does have all the comments listed in there. We received around 176 comments that were submitted. About half were actually relevant to SFD. Since it's an open comment period, individuals are free to comment on whatever they wish in relationship to FMCSA operations. So you'll see some of them that actually were relevant to other areas of our operational stance, such as our safety measurement system or SFS, and other programs that are administered by FMCSA. But still, that leaves around 80 comments or so that were relevant to what we were proposing in the SFD ANPRM that was released, as you see there, last August and closed last November 29th of 2023. Most of the comments, many of them were actually in favor of revising SFD, but there was a lot of mixed feedback exactly on how we should revise that, which is really the impetus for what we're doing today, which is why we're hosting these additional listening sessions to really allow people to provide us some further input as to what they think would be a recommended course of action as FMCSA reevaluates our SFD. Next slide, please. These are a summary of the ANPRM questions that were asked. There were several of them. You can see about 12 questions that were asked. Stacy is going to go through this in a little more detail as we go through the rest of the presentation today, really not necessarily going through each individual question, but really kind of covering the topics, the type of items that were discussed and shared, and really facilitate the conversation based upon what was in the original ANPRM and also what was attached to the notices announcing these listening sessions. I'm sure we'll hit this a little bit later, but there will be another listening session virtual the end of July, and there's actually an in-person one this Saturday in Houston, Texas, if you're in the region and wish to stop by. At this point, in the interest of time, I think I will stop talking and actually turn it over to Stacy and Dave to facilitate the rest of the conversation for today. So thank you. Stacy, Dave, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Tom. We could go to the next slide. So my name is Stacy Ropp. I'm a transportation specialist within the compliance division at FMCSA, and I am on the safety fitness determination rulemaking project. So now we're going to transition into kind of the heart of today's call, getting into our SFD discussion. So just to remind everyone, we are taking your comments and your feedback, anything that you would like for us to know about safety fitness determination. Any kind of topic related to SFD, feel free to voice that or type that into the chat as your question. But here we do have highlighted 4 specific topic areas that we're most interested in hearing your feedback in. These were some of the topics we heard many different comments on, and also a lot of mixed feedback. So these are kind of the 4 areas we'd like some more clarity and just some more feedback from everybody with whatever you can provide. So just to highlight them, we have the current 3-tiered rating system that Tom spoke of earlier, which is satisfactory, unsatisfactory, and conditional. And also carriers can still be left unrated if they haven't had a compliance investigation. So we want to hear from you. Should FMCSA retain this 3-tiered system, and why or why not? The next topic would be on switching to a proposed single rating of unfit. And with this unfit rating, all other carriers would then be presumed fit to operate unless they have this unfit determination. So we'd like to hear your thoughts on this, and if there should be any kind of accommodation for carriers that have gone through a compliance investigation successfully versus those that have not had any sort of compliance investigation under this single rating of unfit. Our next topic, we want to hear some feedback on use of our inspection-based data. Primarily, this would be our SMS system that records all of motor carriers' roadside inspections and crash history. Should FMCSA look to incorporate SMS into our SFD rating system? And if not, are there any other type of inspection-based or roadside-based data that we should consider incorporating, and how so? And the final topic we're interested in hearing is how we could possibly incorporate driver behavior. What kind of data should FMCSA consider incorporating? Is there a way that we should distinguish between a driver conviction versus a non-conviction? And should more weight be given to these unsafe driving violations? Similar to how we have it now set up with hours of service, should we kind of put more weight on these unsafe driving behaviors? So again, as you go through with your comments, please also keep in mind just generally what improvements or changes should be made to any of these four proposed discussion topics or any other comments you may have. Which stakeholders do you think benefit most from your suggestions? And are there any stakeholders that would not benefit from any sort of a proposed change? And what is the overall benefit to safety? So with that, I'd like to turn it over to all of you, and we'll start going through some of the questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Tom and Stacy, for that overview. As a reminder, today's session is being recorded, and we will make this recording available on our public website in the coming days. If you have any questions now, you may enter those questions in the Q&A box, or if you'd like to ask those questions out loud, please feel free to tap the raise hand icon. We'll acknowledge you, take you off mute, and you'll be able to ask your question. I'll turn to the Q&A box first, as I see we do have one general question here. And Tom, if I could turn to you first for answering this question, and it's really just a general question. At the top of the session, you noted that FMCSA cannot perform a compliance review on every carrier that the agency authorizes. Can you expand on that statement just a bit?
Yeah, sure. It's honestly just a resource limitation. I mean, considering the millions of CDL holders that are currently engaged in interstate commerce and the tens of thousands of carriers that are in operation across the country, it does become a resource and logistical issue based upon the current resources available to FMCSA in order to do that. In addition, there are certain statutory requirements that FMCSA has in regards to prioritization of certain types of investigations, say those involving motor carriers that are of the highest safety risk to the public. Those are just some of the reasons why it's logistically a challenge for FMCSA to conduct a compliance review of every carrier. Obviously, if individuals have additional comments that they want to provide on that, that's, partially what today is about too, as well. I think we also want to mention real quick, I know it's up here on the screen, that if for some reason you don't feel comfortable announcing your question publicly or typing it in, you can also submit questions in the docket up until August 7th. So you can still submit additional comments in writing.
Thank you so much for that, Tom. And throughout the session, we will offer an opportunity for any questions or comments, both orally and written. Again, if you do have a question or comment, please place it in the Q&A box. And now I'll turn to see if we have any hands raised. Martin, do we have any hands raised for questions?
We do.
And Lindsay Schindler, we see that your hand is raised. Martin, if you could unmute Lindsay for the question.
I've unmuted.
So my question
And
is, if we use the data for the driver fitness, would you be using ELDs for that, like you do for hours of service?
So just to, sorry, this is Dave Yes. Yeah, Dave Yessen, Chief of the Compliance Division. Could you just expand upon that a little bit more?
Well, how would you guys then monitor whether speeding and inattentive driving and things like that.
Okay, okay, all right. Now I understand now. So yeah, I mean, currently ELD, whether or not you are using an ELD or not using ELD, is currently, you know, part of our safety fitness determination process when we do an investigation under, our hours of service examination. One of the questions that we had asked, and I think Stacy had gone through, is should we be looking more into driver behavior, unsafe driver behaviors, and assigning more weight to that aspect when we are determining, a safety rating, a carrier safety rating. So, for example, now when we look at hours of service and we conduct an investigation, if we find critical violations of an hours of service regulation, there's an actual a double pointing that is used under that particular factor. So I guess the obvious question would be if we are doing an investigation or if we're using, as potentially proposed, roadside data to determine a carrier's safety fitness status, should we be assigning more weight to those behaviors, like speeding, reckless driving, in those areas when we're doing a safety fitness determination? I think that's the big question that we're asking.
How do you guys currently gather that information?
Well, that information right now, we gather that information through roadside inspection reports that are done by the state. There's approximately 2 to 3 million of those a year. And that information gets fed into our safety measurement system, which is what we use to determine which carrier we're going to go investigate. And then when we go on site to investigate, we're looking at those unsafe behaviors to see if there's any kind of correlation to what's going on at a company that might be causing drivers to speed. For example, could be a hiring issue that they're not doing due diligence when they're hiring. So it could be a safety, it could fall under safety, their fitness category, or it could be that, operationally they're requiring drivers to, potentially speed in order to complete runs, which might have an hours of service impact. So it can vary depending on the circumstances when we do an investigation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question, Lindsay, and that response, David. Turning back to the chat box and the Q&A box. Our next question asks, in a single rating system, would conditional, non-rated, and satisfactory carriers have the same rating of fit?
So Cicely, if I can jump in for a second, and I don't on that. I no way do I want to discourage people from commenting. What we're really looking for today, and we can certainly try to answer that, as best we can. But to be completely upfront, some of this we're not going to have an answer for, because it is to listen to how you think this system should work. Knowing how the system works now with our 3-tiered process, and knowing the SFD methodology that we have in place, based on the questions that we listed earlier, and it may be helpful, Cicely, if we maybe put those back up on the screen. It would also be helpful, in addition to some of the kind of the process related questions as to how things go, to get your feedback as to why you think we should or should not stick with a 3-tier system, or do you think there is something that needs to change, in saying regards to how passenger carriers should be held to a higher standard. Do you feel they should or shouldn't, and why? As opposed to really sticking kind of to these 12 questions that were in the ANPRM. The Q&A is great, and I certainly don't want to discourage that. But in terms of making sure that we really give you the opportunity to share your concerns with how the system works now and how you think the system should work in the future, it would really be helpful if we can kind of, focus the comments and questions in that capacity. Because those are the tools that we can point you to to show how things work and how ratings are assigned, and the 3D517 and 3D515 process. We can help provide resources through other means and that. So I just wanted to throw that out there real quick, Cicely, just to make sure that everyone gets their chance to share their concerns and comments onto how things are going now. And Dave, Stacy, you please feel free to answer that question. Or if you need Cicely to repeat it,
Thank
you
you,
can do
Tom.
that too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. Happy to repeat it. The question was, in a single rating system, would conditional, non-rated, and satisfactory carriers have the same rating of fit?
So I think that's the fundamental question. If you went to a single rating system, the thought process would be that unless you were deemed unfit, then there would be potentially everybody else would be fit. So there would be no segregation between a conditional, non-rated, and satisfactory carrier. We would be looking for those carriers that would be deemed unfit as just the single rating system. And as Tom alluded, it's good to hear what people think about that versus what we think about it. We're here to hear what you want to tell us about it.
Martin, I'll turn back to you as we do have hands raised to ask questions.
Yes, we do have one raised hand. Daniel Shelton.
And Daniel, please go ahead with your question.
Daniel, you'll need to unmute on your side now.
While we are waiting for Daniel to unmute, Daniel, we'll certainly come back to you. Oh, looks like you are off mute, Daniel. Go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right, awesome. With respect to the accident preventability program, how are crashes going to be evaluated under the proposed new safety fitness rating methodology? And secondly, is there any type of review under consideration to determine crash preventability when ETSB, the division office, and safety investigators determine a crash is non-preventable and do not use that crash for any evaluation of the crash factor during the compliance review, but FMCSA continues to show the crash as preventable in MICMAS even after a data queue has been completed to change the crash from preventable to non-preventable. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you for that question. And what we're referring to is FMCSA Crash Preventability Determination Program, which was something that was instituted as part of SMS. And it, invariably will have some impacts in our current SFD process and moving forward. But I think the approach would be similar in that, currently in our SFD process now, if a crash is deemed as not preventable, it is not used in a calculation of a carrier safety rating. But again, that would be obviously something in a new system that we would take under consideration as well. And as for the other topics, sort of off on the more of a CPDP program question, we would obviously want to work through any disparities that we see.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question. I see we also have another hand up. And Lindsay, is this a new hand up or the same hand from the previous question? And Martin, if you could unmute Lindsay.
I have.
That was previous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Going to the next person, Patrick Bodie. We see that you also have your hand up. Please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, on states that, I understand a lot of the data is being generated by state LE, but how do you regulate the state LE? I know several states that, for instance, will only do a level 2 inspection if they already see something wrong. They won't do a level 2 inspection just out of the blue and give you either write something up or give you a clean inspection. But that particular state directive to the state agencies that are doing or the LE and the scale houses have directives that, they'll do a walk around. If everything looks good, they'll do a level 3. If they see something at that time, they'll do a level 2. So how would you regulate the states, I guess, to even a playing field for those areas?
So I think in that comment, and we really need to kind of take a step back a bit. As part of the ANPRM questions that we had asked was whether or not we should be using roadside inspection data in some type of unfit, in some type of rating process. Like, just to clarify again, like Tom said, the only time we issue safety ratings now is if we conduct an investigation on site at a motor carrier's place of business. And one of the proposals that we put in the ANPR is, should we be using roadside data to also do a potential, rating process, an unfit standard? And I think, the commenter brings up a point as to how that would potentially play into any kind of, new SFD standard. And I think, some of the things that we see from the SMS side of it, because we do see that as that data does roll in, from our perspective, we do separate violations into basics, and we score, a carrier's performance based on clean inspections. It doesn't have to be an inspection with no violations to actually be a clean inspection in a particular basic. So there are variables involved that we would want to look at to make sure that that playing field was as even as possible. And I mean, from a reference standpoint, I believe the last time we took a look, almost half of the inspections that come into SMS are clean inspections. So when you're talking millions of inspections and half are clean, there are plenty of inspections that are being conducted out there that are not showing violations, that are being attributed to a carrier and, that is actually performing very well. So, but definitely something we would want to consider. So, yes.
Well, and that's why I brought that up is if you're, I think the state or the SMS data is important and does give a better view used along with on-site data in making a rating determination. And I will also put my 2 cents in that I think, a single fit or unfit is not the best route to go. I think it needs to be a multiple tiered, unrated, conditional or satisfactory tier system. I agree with the three tier system. That way, and I've played on both sides of the fence as a safety professional and a carrier, as well as a safety professional in the logistics side. And it definitely gives you a better picture of the carrier that you're entrusting your shipments to. Or what kind, am I going to pay a higher rate to somebody that, has less crashes and guaranteed to be there? Yeah, I might go a little higher rate than I normally would compared to somebody else. So I do think it's very important for all parties involved. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for the comment.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Turning back to our Q&A box, I see that we do have a question from James Grimes of OIDA. And James's question and feedback notes that as FMCSA considers using SMS methodology in SFD, is the agency planning on proposing additional changes to SMS methodology similar to the notice issued in February of 2023? And Dave, Tom, I'll turn to you for any thoughts in response to Jay's question.
Just, Dave, I can jump in real quick, just to Jay's question. Jay, just to make sure I understand, and you can feel free to come off me, are you saying until we incorporate the proposed changes that we talked about in 2023, or anything in addition to the proposed changes we were talking about in 2023?
And Martin, if you,
yeah.
And Martin, if you could please unmute Jay.
Jay, you're unmuted.
Hey, Jay Grimes, OIDA here. Yeah, so in that February 2023, that really addressed the first recommendation from the National Academy's SMS review. I know there were 6 total recommendations. Are you working on kind of those other recommendations? And certainly, yes, we would urge you to finalize further SMS recommendations before any SFD, new SFD rulemaking incorporates SMS.
Okay, thanks, Jay. That helps. And yeah, that did help. Sorry, my reading comprehension's a little slower today, trying to read all the comments and everything that are coming in. So, and I'll let Dave jump in here too. Some of it, certainly we're obviously considering what we proposed in 2023, right? We put that out for a reason when we're in the process of evaluating the comments and assessing what can be changed and how quickly it can be changed. And there's some subsequent communications that we would need to put out before we actually implemented anything in terms of those changes to SMS. So I would say, yes, there are things that we're working on specific to what we put out in 2023. Beyond that, I can't get into a lot of detail about the other stuff. Right now, Dave can probably provide some additional technical comments since he's really more of an expert in the inner workings of the methodology than I. But I do appreciate the comment there, which is exactly the kind of stuff we're looking for today. The second half of your comment about in avoiding the incorporation until some of the other things are included. That's the type of feedback we're looking for from today. So thank you, Jay. Dave, did you want to add anything?
Only that I think, question 7 on the screen kind of asks that question. Should SMS methodology be used? Obviously, like I said, we haven't made a decision in one direction or another, and that's why we put the ANPRM out there. And I think some of the other things that we asked were, if we didn't use SMS, is there another way that we could potentially use roadside data in an SFD calculation, outside of an SMS system, which I think is also a possibility. So I think these are this is the kind of feedback that we're looking for. I think that's a good comment.
Thank you very much for that. Turning back to our chat box, we do have a question here. And the question is from John Harden, who asks, if using unsafe driving violations and other offenses, how will you balance the different level of enforcement from different states? For example, cell phones in Georgia versus the same in other less aggressive states, perhaps. And I'll turn to our panelists for any feedback to John's question and statement.
So I would say, that's always a concern, and I think that it's something we always take under advisement. So, we appreciate the comment, as far as what states, one thing that we always are careful of is, some states may have issues with certain types of violations in their jurisdictions that they feel are important and need to be enforced more heavily than maybe another state. So we would never want to get into telling a state what to look for or not look for, but it is something that we could definitely take under advisement when we're looking at a new SFD process.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll flag for our panelists here that we are receiving feedback as well in the chat box, in the Q&A box. So do feel free to take a look at the feedback that we're getting. And if you'd like for any of our participants to expand on the comment that they've made, we can take them off mute and ask them to do so. Turning back to our chat box and our Q&A box, I do not see any new questions. So I'll turn to you, Martin, to see if we have any hands raised to ask questions.
There are no new hands raised.
Thank you. Turning back to our panelists, Tom, Dave, or Stacy, anything additional that you'd like to add at this point?
No, I'm reading some of the
Sure.
comments in the Q&A, Cicely, right now.
Okay. And we
yeah,
will pause here. If anyone has any questions, do feel free to continue to add those to the chat box in the Q&A box.
Yeah. I don't want to. I mean, people put them in chat for a reason, I suppose. I don't want to force people to know some people don't like public speaking necessarily, but some of them, like I see one from Kevin Blackwell and one from Kim, offering an opinion on question 7. I don't know if Kim felt comfortable discussing her question on 7. I want to make sure I'm understanding what she's actually a couple questions. So question 7 and question 10. So Kim, I don't know if you're still on, if you feel comfortable discussing that as opposed to just putting it in writing. If you are, if you could raise your hand, because there's probably more than one Kim.
Thank you, Kim.
I see Kim's hand up. Kim, you probably need to unmute yourself on your end.
Correct. Mic is enabled.
Kim, if you are speaking, we cannot hear you. You're still on mute on your end. We'll stand by to see if Kim is able to come off of mute. Were there any other thoughts that you wanted to share in response to any of the other feedback that you all are seeing in the chat box or the Q&A box?
Yeah, and Kim looks like she's having problems unmuting herself. So Kim, that's okay. We'll take your written comment. I think it was, it was a good comment. So thank you. I mean, it is, everyone can see the questions that are up on the screen. If anyone has any feedback they'd like to give to us, this is certainly your opportunity to do that now. Dave, Stace, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm just flipping between the Q&A and the chat, reading the questions. I think there's one from Jackie Polk. And I think that we need the 3-tier system, as it takes a very long time to get re-rated if you went with a pass-fail system. There are times that should apply, and the unsatisfactory rating is there for that purpose, but there are also times when there's something not as critical where they should be allowed to consider operating, but also working on correcting the issues. And I think that kind of goes back to what we were asking, about the benefits of the 3-tiered system. One of the issues that we have now with SFD, obviously, is if you are conditional, you are allowed to operate, but there is you can submit evidence of corrective action to get that rating either upgraded back to satisfactory or back to potentially a non-rated capacity. I think one of the aspects of a single tiered rating system would allow us, from a FMCSA perspective, to ensure that we have the resources available to address those those failed carriers, so that a carrier that actually did fail, they would have sufficient time, and we would address it in a sufficient timely manner to potentially get them off that fail list. So I think that's a great comment. So thank you for that.
For that feedback. Again, if you do have questions, do feel free to either type them into the chat or the Q&A box. If you'd like to ask a question or make your statement out loud relative to the topics you see on the screen, please tap the raise hand icon, and
I think we do
we'll
have one hand
ensure you're able
raised.
to do so.
I think we have one raised right now again. So it looks like Daniel again.
Mm-hmm.
His mic is enabled.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
All right. So it's a follow-up, more as a comment to my previous question regarding the safety fitness rating methodology for crashes, whether they're preventable or non-preventable. And this is a very public comment. There was a terrible crash that occurred on September 29th of last year. The NTSB was on the ground Saturday morning. There were 5 fatalities as a result of an HM release. And the Illinois Division Office and the investigators were there for a week working with NTSB and with the motor carrier. And I was present. And at the end of the week, the division office provided us a letter stating the crash was non-preventable. And they said, you'll need that letter because you'll have to data queue the crash when it gets uploaded. Well, we did that. And the results of that was it does not fit the guidelines. So as of today, it is still showing up in MICMAS as a preventable crash and adversely affecting the carrier's rating methodology. And we did everything that we were supposed to do, and nothing happened. So the only point I want to make is words are important, and I like what you're saying, and it sounds really good. And words are important, but actions matter more. You got to be able to back up what you say by your actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We certainly appreciate that feedback. Martin, do we have any other hands raised at this time to ask a question?
No, we don't. Other than Dan's, and he just put it down.
Great. We'll turn back to the Q&A box to see if we have any new questions there. And we have a question by Linda Polk. Linda asks, what considerations or changes will be made by insurance companies if you adopt the single rating system versus the 3-tier system? Will it help or hurt insurance pricing if carriers only have one rating system? And I don't know if we can speculate as to what the insurance companies may do, Tom or Dave, but I turn to you for any feedback there.
Yeah, whether we can't. No, we won't. But yeah, I'll say it that way. That's really, what the insurance companies do or how they utilize, publicly available information is up to them. We're really, really interested in obviously our primary mission, which is safety, and how this impacts our carrier community and our carrier stakeholders. So that's not really something we can get into as to how insurance companies, may or may not use the information. I think the question, in terms of adopting a single or three-tier system, that's really something we're looking for feedback on. It's I think Dave hit on this earlier, where we have our, we think we know, or we may think we know what direction we want to go in, but it really is for those individuals that deal with this on a day-to-day basis. Similar to what Daniel was sharing, his personal experience and what worked and what didn't work or isn't working. Really from that perspective, right now with the three-tier system, what's the feedback on, is it what's working and not working? And if they go into a single system, there's been some comments in the Q&A about some of the potential pros and cons of doing that. That's really something that would be useful for us in this relation. So, Linda, that's not really, we really can't get into what an insurance carrier would do with it. That's really, outside of what we would be, talking about today. And it's really up to them. Just while I have the floor, Cicely, I see there's some other comments in there about how to improve conditional or unsatisfactory ratings. I mean, those are more, of the day-to-day type of stuff that we certainly have information on. And, if anyone has those types of questions, they can certainly reach out to us separately. There's ways to get in contact with us, and we can walk someone through the process as to how to improve a rating. That's what the 385-15 and 385-17 process is currently in existence for now. And really is kind of somewhat separate, from what we're looking at today. But we can certainly help answer that question for them if they want to contact us separately.
Thank you for that feedback, Tom. I do not see any new questions in the chat or Q&A boxes. Martin, I'll turn back to you. Do we have any hands raised to ask questions?
None at this moment. Oh, we do now.
Wonderful. Mike Canistra?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
All right, cool. Mike Canistra, Logistic Dynamics up in Buffalo. I think that, the problem that many of us run into is if you go to the three-tiered system, or that we're currently in a three-tiered system, we're forgetting about the fourth tier, which is the 92% of the carriers that are not rated. And I think, me and my personal experience with the company, I think that's our struggle more than anything, is the amount of not rated carriers that are in there. So, if we went to a two-tier or whatever the next progression might be, what happens with that 90% that's out there that's really never been rated? I guess that's, a lot of our concern, I think. And I thank you all for your time as well.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. When we look at some of the issues that get pointed out with our current system, and I mentioned, only ratings only get assigned when we're doing an investigation. I think part of the understanding is that not being able to reach every single, and Tom had alluded to this, I think, the number is somewhere north of 800,000 federally regulated carriers, and around 2% get investigated per year. And that's why I think, as part of this SFD discussion, is this concept of assessing everyone, essentially, that we have data on with an SFD, would be helpful in an understanding that, carriers were being assessed, and if they didn't rise to an unfit standard, then, that would sort of put a dent in the 92%, but that's sort of the question that we're asking. How do we get there? And I think some of the other issues that we talk about is, the value of a satisfactory rating from 1988 versus somebody who had a review last month, but it was an unrateable review. Is there maybe the potential of identifying carriers that way? If you're unfit, reviewed, not reviewed, is another concept. So I think these are all good questions that we're looking for feedback.
Thank you both. I see that we also have a hand raised. Jackie Polk.
Your mic is unmuted.
Good afternoon. Thank you for recognizing me. And I want to speak regarding the driver behavior. I'm not sure I understand how to distinguish between conviction versus no conviction. I'm assuming that would be a citation or something of that nature. But do want to mention that, as I look at the rating system, it is rating a motor carrier. Certainly they hire drivers, and hopefully they are doing the necessary background checks to help them make the best hiring decisions possible. However, sometimes what the driver does is kind of like our kids, when they're not in front of us, we aren't certain what they're doing, but as soon as we find out that they've done something, we take action. And so I just want to caution that while I think that, yes, unsafe driving violations are more serious in nature, I also think that the motor carrier deserves the opportunity to show what they did as a result of that. And again, someone alluded to the fact that every jurisdiction is going to have different plans and procedures in place for how they handle roadside inspections. So, one motor carrier may have this issue and is caught, while another could have more of it taking place, but their driver's never caught doing it. So some of it is subjective. And I really did like a comment that someone else made about, some of the safety systems that motor carriers are employing, that they should receive, some sort of positive benefit if vehicles are equipped with those safety mechanisms.
Yep. Bill, thank you. Thank you for the comment. Yes, and I think that's something one thing I'll put out there as well is, part of in our current SFD process, in one of our factors related to maintenance, we do use a carrier's out of service rate to determine potentially what their safety rating would be. So, as another alternative as well, there could be the potential that, there could be a calculation based on their, unsafe driving behaviors of their drivers that could also factor into it. So, there are avenues that can be explored. And I understand your comment about convictions versus, citations. And, a lot of the data we get are observed behaviors on an inspection report that don't necessarily, result in a conviction or even a citation. But they are little pieces to the puzzle that we do look at, and we always, and we're looking for patterns specifically. So I do thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Martin, I see we have another hand raised. Zach, please go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you. I was shared a few things there in the comments, and I just, from the perspective of truck crash victims, executive director here at the Truck Safety Coalition, we're of the strong opinion that, again, it's what's in the title, right? Safety fitness determinations. The point we view of this system is to provide as objective as possible, right? With the limited data you have available. That's been a lot of the discussion today. You're piecing things together. What can we look at that's most likely going to be true for future performance based on what past performance you have? And I think it all belongs. Every single piece is relevant, and as someone just said, over time will show a pattern. There's lots of opportunities for carriers, whether small or large, to provide corrective action, corrective training to drivers. If they see a theme, they should be the first ones seeing it. By the time someone happens to be randomly inspected, most of the time they're random, right? Odds are whatever behaviors, in our view, are being observed at that point are not new. So I think that's something worth noting. A point in time is typically already telling a story that we're just getting in on. Into some of the other points or questions raised, just wanted to affirm that yes, driver behavior should be weighted. I think that's a no-brainer, and we should be, rewarding those who hire and provide good training and provide that corrective action, or drivers of their own accord who make a point to drive as safe as possible and not put people at risk for short-term gain. And I think that that's very helpful information for the public at large, for shippers, for brokers, for insurers. It's all relevant and necessary for folks to make the most informed decisions they can if they're prioritizing safety. And that would help safety at large for everyone else. Same thing on number 10 that Jackie referenced. The idea that we know if there is, the listing of those technologies that we know are statistically less likely to have crashes, folks should receive some sort of benefit for that in the rating system. It does not indicate necessarily that they'll operate safely, but we know if they do utilize these technologies, whether it be telematics or automatic emergency braking and other advanced driver assistance systems, even forward collision warning alone has significant safety benefit. Folks should be rewarded for that. And then just lastly on this discussion on the lack of consistency amongst enforcement, that's nothing new. I mean, it's been that way forever. And the idea that the safety fitness determination should take into account that there's inconsistent enforcement capability or willingness, so therefore we shouldn't hold people to a high standard. I mean, that's a race to the bottom. I don't see how that should be something that's relevant to be accounted for and how all this is calculated. So that was a lot of comments. I appreciate your time in doing this listening session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zach. I'll turn to our panelists to see if they have any follow-up or thoughts to Zach's comment.
But appreciate the comments. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thanks. I was going to say the same thing. Thanks, Jack. Great comment. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll turn to Jay Grimes, who also has a question, and then to the chat box, as I see we have some new questions there as well. Martin, could you please unmute Jay? Jay, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, just commenting on the technology question and whether that should be considered. And as Zach mentioned, we're not going to know if they're operating more safely, and I think that's the important thing that we need to analyze, and that carriers simply shouldn't be automatically rewarded just for the mere installation of safety technologies. And that, it's a critical question to determine what qualifies, and that's probably another issue, but certainly there's a whole lot of so-called safety technologies out there that are available, but unless they're actually improving safety performance, you shouldn't be automatically rewarded for that. From the small business perspective, that can create certainly a scenario where can't afford some of these technologies, and then larger carriers who could be rewarded just for the installation, that's going to have a negative effect on the kind of comparative rating to some smaller carriers who could see their rating downgraded even without a change in their actual safety performance. Do have to, I think, value driver experience, driver training, actual safety performance over the simple installation of some technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that feedback. I'll quickly turn to our Q&A box for our next question. And the question asks, why are out of service data used to determine safety? And the participant notes that they have trucks that have been out of service for months because they cannot have drivers, and they feel that it may not be fair to include this out of service data as part of their safety determination. And I'll turn to our panelists for any feedback there.
Yeah, I can clarify that one. When we use the term out of service, we're referring to a vehicle that gets stopped and inspected, and according to the criteria that CBSA has established, would put that vehicle out of service roadside, not vehicles that you don't have drivers for that happen to be sitting, that you're waiting to hire drivers. That's not what we mean by out of service.
Very much for that clarification.
Sure.
And turning back to see if we have any hands raised, John Harden. Martin, if you could unmute John for his question or comment.
His mic is enabled.
And John, you may have to unmute on your side.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. There's a lot of discussion back and forth in the different enforcement rates of the state, and I had one of those questions. I'm a former officer, and I can assure you that if one of my operators or drivers gets a citation, I'm grateful they were stopped. It may have prevented an accident. The issue is not a complaint in the sense that we don't think these are valid or that we're over enforced. We have an excellent law enforcement community here in the state of Georgia. But you may have a carrier in Georgia that has an unsafe driving score that's significantly higher than, say, someone in Colorado, but a crash score that is 1 or 2 or even 0, and that's happened to us. My only concern is, and it's not the race to the bottom, I get that perception, but that's not the concern. The concern is if you're going to rate us fit or unfit and include SMS data, we would like that to be even throughout like carriers. And I know SMS is supposed to do that, and I'm not an expert in it, and maybe I'm completely wrong in this thought. But if we're doing everything we can and we run in a more aggressive state, but we're not crashing and we've bought all the technology and we're doing this, yet we're compared to somebody that doesn't get near the scrutiny, are we performing better with the lower crash rating? Or I just the issues with SMS are things that we like to talk about in the safety community. I'm all for SMS, but if it determines our rating, that could be complicated, especially if it goes to just 2, you're fit or unfit. I mean, you're talking about shutting people down that are good, strong, positive, safety-minded carriers, potentially, I guess. But I'm new to this, so I'll hang up and listen.
No, I mean, you can stay on the line too in case you have a follow-up. But no, I think there has to be a distinction between SMS and SFD. Of that, there is no doubt. Because if you understand the concept of SMS, it's our agency's prioritization tool. And as you mentioned, within SMS, there are safety event groupings that put carriers of like size or like safety events compared together. So each carrier gets a measure, which is their quote unquote true safety score. And then they're also then given a percentile, which is, how they are comparing to carriers of like size or like activities. I think trying to do something from an SFD perspective, you would want to be very careful about using any kind of comparison concept like percentiles. I believe back in 2016 when, we were looking at certain basics and only use a carrier's measure, and then drawing a line towards the top of that, 0 to 100 scale to determine which carrier is unfit. And it was going to be a hard line. I mean, there could potentially be a concept where, some carriers would never cross that bar in a particular month because it wasn't a percentile ranking for comparison purposes. So I think your point is valid in that, you could just use our current version of SMS into an SFD, but that doesn't necessarily mean there aren't components to it that couldn't be used in an SFD.
Thank you.
Thank you, John, for that feedback and question. Martin, do we have any hands raised at this time?
No, we don't.
And I do not see any new questions in the chat box. We'll check the Q&A box here now. Thank you all again for the feedback that you are posting in the Q&A box in the chat box. I do not see any new questions, but as we wait for questions and additional hands, just a reminder to everyone that today's session is the first in a list of 3 sessions that we will host. Today, this session is fully virtual. On Saturday, June 29th, we'll be in Houston, Texas at the Texas Trucking Show, where we'll host an in-person listening session on this same topic. So if you or anyone in your network will be at the Texas Trucking Show on Saturday, we certainly welcome your participation and additional feedback or questions there. Martin, I see we do have a new hand up. You are unmuted. Go ahead with your question. Sladana?
Yes. Yes, thank you for this opportunity. I have more of a comment/brief question in regards to the should the FMCSA assign more weight to the unsafe driving violations? Because in some cases, at least the ones I've seen, a company gets roadside inspection with certain unsafe driving violation, for which obviously the driver was at fault. But that only goes to the company's SMS score, not the driver's NBR record, unless he received an actual citation, where honestly, in majority of cases, I've seen they didn't receive anything apart from the company's roadside. So, it's my understanding as a safety person, the faces of the companies are those drivers that we hire, and our safety score depends on them, basically. But in those cases, considering companies get NBRs as pre-employment determination factor, my question is, I guess, how can we as company protect ourselves in these particular cases? Because, if violations only go to the company and not the driver, how can other companies see that the driver is not good and prevent this from happening?
Thank you for that question, Sladana. Dave, I'll turn to you for your initial thoughts there.
So I think it's a 2-part question. Obviously, if you are a motor carrier employing a driver and you are seeing inspections come in with unsafe driving violations that aren't being ticketed, that wouldn't show up on an MVR. Obviously, you would have insight into those, and as some previous commenter mentioned, take the appropriate action. I think the bigger concern is that when you're hiring a driver, you're running their MVR and you're looking at the status of their license and their driving history, and none of that information will show up there unless they are cited and convicted. But obviously, there are other avenues. I mean, FMCSA has the pre-employment screening program, which I think is a terrific resource for carriers to look at the data on a driver, and inspection history wise, before they make a hiring decision. It's outside of SFD, but that's something that can be used. And I think, like I said, when we talked about how we should be using this data, one of the specific questions we asked is, when making an SFD determination, should we be looking at convictions? Should we be looking at citations? And that's sort of, where we're looking for that feedback.
Thank you, Sladana, and thank you, Dave. Daniel Shelton, please go ahead with your question or comment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. My comment is, and my question for FMCSA, and also directed for the gentleman from Georgia regarding his concerns. It's been my experience, and I don't speak, I know from where I come from. I'm assuming that the mission of FMCSA has not changed, and the mission is to reduce crashes. So if that's the case, which I think it is, then we should certainly be looking at crashes as the primary emphasis on the safety fitness rating methodology, whether it be preventable, non-preventable, and all those things that go into that. All these other violations that are in the Federal Motor Carrier safety regulations assume to go toward preventing crashes. Well, some do, but most don't. And a lot of them are paperwork violations. So there's got to be some way to spread out those that really matter for reducing crashes versus those that don't. And I'll just give you one example. I've never seen a shipping paper where the ID number, shipping name, hazard class, and packing group in the wrong order ever was a crash causation. So all these things, so it's certainly a violation, and if the regulation is there, it should be enforced equally. But as the gentleman from Georgia stated, and I agree with him 100%, they're not all enforced the same. So in order to make this work, FMCSA, you got your work cut out for you to get all the states on the same level. So good luck with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Daniel. We'll appreciate your feedback there. We'll pause here to see if there are any other participants with questions you'd like to ask out loud. If so, please tap the raise hand icon and we'll acknowledge you. Or please continue to provide your feedback and questions to us in the Q&A and chat boxes. Linda, I see that your hand is up. Please go ahead with your question or comment. Linda, you may need to also unmute on your end.
So I was
Yes.
actually meaning to type a question and just raise my hand so you wouldn't go off before I finish asking. But there are I've had experience with certain way station employees who see it as their job to just find something wrong, regardless of how minor it is, or not have any leniency. For example, I've had, I was driving and shortly after getting on the road, a rock hit the windshield, and there was no way I could stop and get that fixed before I got to the way station. Fortunately, they did not make me, I don't think they made me, be out of service for that one, but it was close. And so is there a way for compassion to be called upon when a driver has something minor? Like another situation I had recently, one of our drivers their tail light went out. Well, it was between the time they did the pre-inspection and they got to the weigh station, it was working in the pre-inspection. They had a extra bulb in the truck, and so they fixed it right there at the weigh station, and yet they were still dinged for having a light out. Is there not some way for common sense and mercy to be shown in those kind of situations?
Dave or Tom, any thoughts?
I'll jump in. Thanks, Linda. I mean, that's, I can certainly appreciate, your comment. I mean, that really is individual officer discretion at the time of the stop. It's, the same if when any of us are stopped, either, for speeding or, not slowing down sufficiently for a stop sign. It's there are a lot of factors that weigh into whether a citation is issued or not. From FMCSA's perspective, we don't dictate any type of parameters from that regard. And there are organizations such as the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, that really works with our state partners to help identify best practices for enforcement in regarding interpretation of our federal motor carrier safety regulations. But from an FMCSA perspective, obviously, as we're looking at it from an SFD perspective and even through SMS, it's the objective data, right? We're getting if in the officer's discretion there was a violation and a citation was issued. We take the data from that point and do the analysis and comparison across the group that we currently do. I mean, that's certainly something, that can be shared, with our law enforcement community. And like I said, through the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance and other entities that represent law enforcement. You can also reach out to your local MCSAP lead agency in your state if you feel that you have concerns about how certain things are being interpreted. And that information should be available on our website as well if you wanted to try to do that.
Thank you, Linda. We certainly appreciate that feedback, and thank you, Tom. We do have about 10 minutes left in today's session, so that's about time to take about 2 more questions. Again, as a reminder, this is just the first in our series of 3 listening sessions on this topic. Our next session will be in person in Houston on Saturday at the Texas Trucking Show. So if you are participating in the Texas Trucking Show, do feel free. We'd love to have you join us in person for our next listening session on this topic. Registration for the session is not required, but you will need to register to access the conference, and registration for the Texas Trucking Show is at no cost. We'll pause here to see if we have any additional questions or comments through the chat or the Q&A boxes, or if you'd like to ask your question out loud, we do have time for 1 or 2 additional questions. Our session today is being recorded, and we will make this publicly available on our website in the coming days.
I'm not seeing anything come in new, Cicely. Let me just double check.
Nope. I do not see any new questions. So again, Stacy Ropp, Transportation Specialist, Dave Yessen, Chief of our Compliance Division, and Tom Liberatore, Director, Office of Enforcement and Compliance. Thank you so much for your time today. I'll now turn to Mr. Daryl Rubin, Associate Administrator for Safety for FMCSA, for closing comments. Daryl?
Thank you, Cicely. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sure can.
Well, thank you and hello to everybody. I'm going to close this out by saying thank you for a couple things. One, thank you all for taking the time to participate in today's listening event, whether you shared thoughts or comments verbally or in writing. We're collecting all of those and taking each one very seriously. I want to let you know that by doing all of these sessions, it enables us to gather more information to be able to make better decisions with. And you have from us at FMCSA that we do these to learn and understand and be able to take the information and apply it the best way possible. So again, thank you all for taking the time today. We appreciate your feedback and hope to hear future feedback from you as well in these listening sessions. So thank you and have a great rest of your day. That's it from me, Cicely.
Thank you very much. And if you'd like to follow us on social media, we encourage you to do so. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We will highlight on our social media channels when the recording for this session is available. You can also visit our website at fmcsa.dot.gov for any updates. Thank you all for participating today.